All right, so we finally finished that first triaxle load of logs that we had ordered earlier this summer. If you guys don't remember what I'm doing here, I'm doing kind of an experiment, because when you're buying logs, you can buy them a couple different ways. The load that we just finished up was a firewood pole load that was $950. This is a scrag pole load that was $1,250. And I'm kind of seeing which one do I want to buy going forward. So we're doing a little bit of a test. I have kept all of the firewood from this load separate, so I know exactly how much cords we got out of this load, and I want to do the same thing for this load here. But now that this one is done, we finally have an answer, and we can start to come up with our price per cord of our input costs in the firewood that we're making. So the first batch of baskets that we made with that new load was the stuff that we took up to Matt. We took up 8 IBC totes up to Matt to have him kiln dry them for us. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in the back. Now, this one is clearly not full, and the reason for that is because when we took it to go get them kiln dried, all of these baskets had shrunk from up here to probably right there, or maybe even a little bit lower. And so I sacrificed one basket to go through and re-top off each of these ones here. So there was 8 full baskets here, and then after having kiln dried it, it turned into like 7.5-ish baskets. So we're gonna call that 8 because when it was made, it was 8. Then this is the first batch that I put in my solar kiln. There's 6 baskets here. And if we go take a look at the solar kiln, I've got 6 more in there right now. So inside the solar kiln, we have another 6 baskets. So what is that? 8 and 6 is 14. Plus these 6 brings us up to 20. And then what we just finished up at the beginning of this video was these next 5 that are gonna go into the solar kiln next. So that brings us to a total of 25 IBC totes that we got out of that one load of firewood poles for $950. Guys, I want to take a minute to talk about today's sponsor, Camel City Mills Work Socks. I've been wearing these socks for the last couple of months, and what a difference it has made in the comfort level of my feet while wearing my steel toes 8 to 10 hours every single day. They are made with Ironside merino wool in America, right down in the great state of North Carolina. They're designed to keep your feet cool and dry in the summertime and warm in the wintertime. They come in a couple different sizes, ankle, crew, and boot, a couple different colors. But the most important part to me is the fact that they keep my feet dry. I've mentioned this before in previous videos. These steel toe work boots on, they're waterproof, which is great in the spring and fall when it's mucky and muddy out. While it's great at keeping water out, it also traps sweat in. And I was running into the issue where I was getting athlete's foot if I would wear my work boots too many days in a row, and I was putting them on boot dryers and the whole 9 yards. Well, ever since I started wearing Camel City Mills work socks, that problem has been gone. If you want to give these socks a try and see what all the fuss is about, you can use the link in the description below to get 10% off my favorite pair of work socks. Now, the difference between these 2 loads, if you missed it in the first video I did when these got delivered, is the firewood pole load is going to be smaller diameter stuff. The scrag pole load is larger diameter stuff. The firewood pole load, I think they say, you're going to have stuff 3 to 4 inches in diameter, whereas the scrag pole load, there should be nothing in here smaller than 6 inches in diameter. Like, this is probably the smallest log that you'll get in a scrag pole load. Here's another one that's kind of smaller, and that is the small end. The larger end is much larger than that. But the idea is that with the smaller diameter stuff, there's going to be less wood on the truck because there's a lot more air pockets and voids and things. Whereas when you get larger logs on there, you should get more cords out of this load than the firewood pole load. All right, so now we know how many IBC totes we got out of that one firewood pole load that cost $950. Now let's figure out what that works out to on our input cost basis, price per cord. So if we made 25 IBC totes, that each one of these totes holds 1/3 of a cord, we're going to divide that by 3. So that gives us roughly 8.33 cords that we got. That's what those 25 IBC totes equals. And then if we take 950 divided by that 8.33, that's going to give us $114 is what the logs cost us per cord. And that's where, you see these guys on Facebook Marketplace that sell firewood for $200 a cord. And it's like, you're not making any money. You're just trading money and you're giving your labor away for free. I mean, you might make some money, but well, let's just figure it out here. So if you're selling firewood for $200 a cord and the cost of your logs is $114 a cord, you're making $86 a cord for your time to convert it from a raw material log into a burnable product that you can deliver and take to people.
Now I wanted to pause here real quick because I know some people are going to say, well, what about the guys that go back in the woods and cut their own firewood and they don't pay for logs to be delivered? There's still a huge expense of your time in going back and doing that. Those logs, even though they don't cost you anything monetarily, they cost you a ton in terms of your time. So I would actually argue that the guys going back and sourcing their own material back in the woods are actually paying more for the logs when you consider their time, because there's no way they can do it as efficiently as the loggers do it. So I'm happy to pay the $950 because when you factor in your time, it would actually end up costing me more to go back in my own woods and get the logs myself.
Now we've got to figure out how long does that process take. I know when I used to take my side-by-side up into the woods with a chainsaw and I'd cut deadfall trees, bring them back out here to the wood yard and split them with a hydraulic splitter, that process took me about 7 hours. So we'll use that number, 7 hours for 1 cord of wood, and you're making $85 profit, or I guess for your labor, because there really is no profit. Let's say $85 divided by 7 hours, you're making roughly $12 an hour is what you're paying yourself in labor. And so when I say you're not making any profit, I mean that if you were to remove yourself from the business and hire somebody to do that for you, you would be paying them $12 an hour, and there's no profit left over for the business. That labor cost is an expense. It doesn't add to the bottom, it doesn't make its way down to the bottom line at all. So that's where I say you're not making any money, you're just trading money. You're giving the loggers money. If you were to pay somebody to do that labor portion for you, you're giving them money. And then by the time you sell the wood, there's nothing left for profit for the business. Now let's figure out roughly how much I'll make from that load of firewood poles total. And we're gonna have to use some assumptions here because I do sell the firewood different ways. I sell it through the roadside stand where I charge a certain price per cord that way. People can come here and pick up an IBC tote, and that's a certain price. I can deliver it on the deck over trailer with a mini skid, that's a certain price. I think it's gonna get way too complicated if I try to do it with all the different ways that I sell wood, so we're just gonna pick one and run with it. And I think the simplest one is somebody comes here and picks up an IBC tote, because if I'm delivering it with the mini skid, there's additional costs and there's additional revenue, and it's a whole different business, right? The delivering of the wood is a separate business than the making and selling of the wood here. So I think to keep it simple, we're just going to assume somebody's coming here and picking up an IBC tote. I charge $125 for somebody to come here and pick up an IBC tote. So if we take 25 times 125, that's going to give us roughly $3,125 of total revenue. Now, revenue is not what you're making. That is just the total dollars amount that you will get. Somebody will hand you in cash for that wood before you consider any expenses. And we know right off the top, $3,125 minus the cost of the load of the logs is $950. That leaves us with $2,175 just for the cost of the wood. Now we still have to figure out our equipment costs, fuel, labor, all of that stuff.
All right, so I put my accounting hat back on here to come up with a quick profit and loss statement for one Triaxle load of logs. How much do I make in top line revenue? How much does it cost me to turn those logs into firewood? And what does that leave me with for profit at the end of the day? So we already talked about up here, I've got top line revenue of $3,125. That's 25 totes at $125 a tote, $3,125. And then we already talked about the cost of the logs, $950. Now we need to figure out what are the rest of our expenses to give us the full picture. And so over here on the right, I've got a little depreciation schedule. That is going to help me figure out what does it cost me to run all the equipment to make that into firewood. So up on the top here, I've got the purchase price of the equipment divided by the useful life, and then that'll give you a cost to use. So the Easton Made Evo, for example, is a $70,000 machine divided by a useful life of 4,000 hours. That gives us a rough cost to use of $17.50 per hour. Now that useful life is a complete shot in the dark. It could be 2,000, 4,000, 8,000, 10,000, and that's going to, whatever number you use as your estimate is going to drastically affect your depreciation expense. So I went with 4,000 hours. I've got no idea. I think that's a safe bet. But then if you figure that costs us $17.50 per hour to use, and we use the machine based on the hour meter from when we started that Triaxle load of logs to when we finished it, it took us 8.5 hours of machine runtime. And then you take 8.5 hours times your cost to use at $17.50 per hour. Our total depreciation expense, based on those assumptions, for one Triaxle load of logs is roughly $149 for the Evo. And then I went and completed that same calculation for the excavator, the mini skid, the barrel screener, and the dump trailer. And that gives us a total depreciation expense of $236.85, which then just gets transposed right over to our profit and loss statement. Then we have our fuel. That's going to be one of our next biggest expenses. And you can see I just have average fuel consumption. The Evo uses roughly 1.5 gallons per hour. We used 8.5 hours. That gives us roughly 12.8 gallons of fuel to convert a Triaxle load of poles to a Triaxle load of firewood. And at right now, today's fuel prices for gasoline is $3.19. And that gives us a total fuel cost for the Evo of $41. And again, we redid that same calculation for the excavator and the mini skid. And our total fuel expense is $59.15. And we transpose that over to the profit and loss statement. Then from there, we've got labor. Again, 8.5 hours of machine runtime. Let's use that number for labor as well. There's probably a little bit more labor because you've got cleanup time and cleaning up all the sawdust and dumping the chaff out of the dump hopper and all that. Let's just use 8.5 hours at $20 an hour, and we've got $170. Then because I stack all of my wood, I know I can usually stack a cord of wood in about an hour. So we'll just run with 8.5 hours again at $20 an hour. So our total labor cost is $170 for cutting the wood, $170 for stacking the wood, $340 total for our labor. And then once we get after labor, it gets down to the pretty nitty gritty. We've got chains and bar oil. A chain is $50 a chain. I can cut. These firewood processors are amazing. These 404 chains, I'm getting between 25 and 30 cords per one chain, and that's without sharpening. And then you figure that you can go ahead and sharpen that chain roughly 6 times. The cost per chain is very negligible at $2.31 per Triaxle load. And then bar oil, I know when Andrew dropped off the Eastimate, the bar oil tank was completely full, and it is 5 gallons. And I didn't have to add any bar oil to it until the machine got to 40 hours of runtime. So $1.05 per Triaxle load is pretty negligible as well. And then if you look over here on the right in column E, I actually have all of these numbers broken down on a per cord basis as well. But if we go back and look at our total revenue, $3,125, minus our total expenses of $1,589.36, gives us a total profit and loss per Triaxle load of $1,535. So every truck that I cut up, I will effectively be making $1,535. And then again, if you look at on a per cord basis, I'm charging $375 per cord. My expenses into that is $212, and I get to keep at the end of the day $184 per cord. Okay, so that is all of the accounting on this load of poles. There's actually a good exercise. I haven't done that since back when we were running the Yappa and the Eastimate 37D, so it was good to run through all those numbers again with the new equipment and see how our costs have changed. But what does that tell us about this load here? Well, if our cost per cord on this stuff here was $114 and this load cost $1,250, if we take $1,250 divided by $114 per cord, in order for this to be the same cost per cord, we need there to be at least 11 cords in this load. And you might be looking at this pile and saying, well, there's no way. Well, this pile is a little bit light. If you remember when Matt brought his 48C over here, we actually took 2 cords out of this pile and made it with his 48C. So with what's left here, I need there to be at least 9 cords. But I'll be completely honest, even if this $1,250 load here works out to be more expensive on a price per cord than the $114 we got for the firewood poles,
I mean, it depends on how much more expensive, but if it's slightly more, I'd probably still go with this because it's going to be that much more enjoyable and probably faster to run this load because of the larger diameter. You know, you got to think you're getting anywhere from 12 to 16 pieces of firewood per push, whereas when you're running those 3 and 4 and 5 inch logs through that 16-way wedge, you know, you're only getting 2 or 4 pieces per push. It just takes a lot longer to put up any significant amount of wood. So I think I'll be able to do more in a faster or shorter period of time with this load here. Like, you know, we did 8.33 cords in 8.5 hours of machine runtime, which is only a cord per hour, which for the Estimate Evo is not very impressive. And I think the reason for that is because we were running such small diameter stuff. I think we should get that 1 cord per hour number up significantly with this load of logs here. So even if this load of poles comes in at $120, $125, maybe even $130 per cord, probably still would go with this. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I know I kind of went down the rabbit hole with the spreadsheets and the accounting and all that stuff, but I do know from talking to people at trade shows, it seems like a lot of people really enjoy when I do that, because I guess the average person doesn't think that way. I do, just because it's built into me as a former accountant. But yeah, I hope, you know, I try to make it easy enough for everybody to understand and follow along. It's not terribly complicated. It's just simple arithmetic, but it is just a different way of looking at it. Rather than going with your gut and your heart, you actually look at the numbers and say, does this make sense? So hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, give me a big thumbs up, click that subscribe button, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for watching.